Wow, good day everybody. It's great to see so many people turn out for our humble presentation. Let me start with, more audio? Let me start with a question. Who has an Hadoop cluster in production? Wow, lots of people. That's great. How big is your Hadoop cluster? No, I'm kidding. I wouldn't ask that. We do lots of these presentations, and that's usually more sound. More sound. Can you hear me now? Test. How's that? More sound? Better? More? Even more. Even more. More sound? How about now? Ooh, I can hear myself now. Even better. I like it. All right, we do a number of these presentations, and usually the first question we get is, how big is your cluster? We're not embarrassed to talk about the size of our cluster, but we think there's more interesting things to discuss. Thank you again for coming to our presentation. My name is Don Smith. I'm a manager on the Business Intelligence Engineering team at Big Fish Games. With me is my boss, the Director of Business Intelligence Engineering, David Darden.
So this better be a good presentation.
Review period's over, so I'm not too worried about it. Let me get started. We thought that we'd like to give a presentation where we emphasize what it takes to successfully build and extract value from a Hadoop cluster. This is our agenda for today. Pretty short and sweet because we don't have a lot of time. Let me jump into telling you a little about us. David and I are representing the Big Fish Business Intelligence Engineering team. Now, Big Fish was actually acquired by Churchill Downs about 1.5 years ago. The Churchill Downs of Kentucky Derby fame. We were a little surprised by this acquisition until we learned that Churchill Downs is actually a diversified entertainment company. By acquiring Big Fish Games, it helped them diversify into the mobile entertainment space. Let me tell you about Big Fish. This slide gives you some of the story, but what you might not realize is how data-driven Big Fish Games really is. In fact, it was the quality of our BI that really gave Churchill confidence in making the Big Fish Games acquisition. We on the Business Intelligence Engineering team we're a small team. We're highly focused on empowering the business to answer the questions that they have to run Big Fish better. We are the owners of the Enterprise Data Warehouse. Now, originally this was built on an MPP database architecture from IBM called Netezza. And that platform has served us well for a number of years. But a couple years ago, we found a need to augment it with a Hadoop cluster. We went with the IBM Big Insights distribution of Hadoop, which is the standard Apache Hadoop distribution with a few value adds from IBM. Now, since we're on the business intelligence team and we have access to all the data, we can determine what kinds of questions you would have about us. And probably the number one question you'd have is, well, what's your number one game in Ireland? We did a little research and it turns out by far Gummy Drop is our number one game in Ireland. In fact, let's watch a little video about it. This is a match 3 game. Everyone loves. Can travel the world, matching gummies, restore famous sites. All right, has anyone played Gummy Drop yet? Now it's available in all the app stores, so if you want to just take a minute, go ahead and download it. I'll wait. No, I'm kidding. We don't have time for fun and games. All right, let me give some high-level goals of our team. We want to give the business the right data to the right people at the right time. But we We don't have a build it and they will come philosophy. Instead, we work very closely with the business to identify their needs and build what they want when they want it. We are able to move fast because we empower our users, we equip them to access the tools and the data that we provide and basically teach them how to fish so they can do a lot of their own work without having to rely on the business intelligence engineering team. This allows us to focus more on our engineering strengths and move faster to really provide more value more quickly to the company. Now we had a use case that I mentioned that made us look beyond our Netezza appliance platform, and we begin to stumble across this big data constraint that a lot of people are probably familiar with. Now, big data being relative, for us it was mostly around data volumes. If we take one hit mobile game, you can go from 0 installs to a couple million in just weeks around the world. And that can really move the data in terms of data, or move the needle in terms of data volumes. So we needed a system, a platform that could scale with the business. Now the IBM Netezza is a great database, data warehouse appliance, but it's sort of like buying a car. And when your family grows and now you need a bigger car, you can't just add more seats to your car. You actually need to trade it in and get a new, bigger car. And so it is with the Netezza. So we wanted a more scalable platform. We needed a platform that we could land these large data sets and do some exploration to determine, is there even any valuable data here? We needed a platform that gave us tools to work with some of the awkward data sets, JSON, semi-structured data sets, text data sets, tools that we could manipulate this data and discover if there's value there. And again, we wanted a platform where we could offload some of the historical data that was sitting in our enterprise data warehouse on the Netezza platform, but still keep it in a place where it was easily queryable and accessible by the business. And finally, if the platform could offload some of the workloads that we were running on the Netezza platform, it would be even better. And that, of course, was Hadoop. All right, this is a high-level view of our architecture. Hopefully you can see it okay. We have dozens of source systems feeding into our enterprise data warehouse. Most of them still hit our Netezza system first, and they come in, in raw formats, and as they move through our environment, they become more curated. We have a number of clients accessing the data. These are business systems and processes that use the data to improve the business and run some of the things like our website. We have a lot of users who do analysis on the data and visualization, primarily using Tableau. And then we have a number of users who are using SQL and R to access the data and gain a deeper understanding of what's happening at the player behavior level in games and just performance of our marketing efforts. At the bottom here you see the Big Insights Hadoop cluster. This is a recent addition and it's really transformed our environment to a logical data warehouse. Using the Big Insights platform with a couple of value adds from IBM, namely Big SQL and Fluid Query, it's allowed us to integrate with the existing enterprise data warehouse very simply and easily. We can move data between the different systems, do processing, do querying across this integrated platform. All right, David's going to talk about how we pitch this initial investment. David.
Thank you, Don. All right, who here is actually trying to pitch a new technology to the business units in your company? All right. Anybody here? Most of the people, it seems like, already have Hadoop out in production. You're using this heavily. Any examples of what you're trying to get out of this presentation or why you're here? Just because we're awesome, you wanted to come and see sort of what we're doing? All right, I'll take it. Let me talk to you a little bit about the way our team normally approaches things like this. As was mentioned in the keynote today by the gentleman from EMC, we really try and start with a goal in mind that's highly aligned with the business. We are, as a business intelligence team, we're actually on the business side, not engineering or operations or technology focused in terms of how we engage with the company. What we typically do when we're coming up with new capabilities, new things that we're offering to our company, is we start that with conversations. What we're looking at is primarily 3 different time ranges. We're looking at the current and the near term. We're looking at a medium-term projection, for which for us is about 6 months, 9 months, in terms of what business capabilities we need, how the company is intending to grow, how they're intending to pivot and change. We're also looking at the long term, typically 1 or 2 years out, to determine what platforms we want in place, what capabilities to offer. The way that we generally approach this across our company is by talking to people, which that's sometimes for, if you're in the technology space, not the most fun thing to do, but it's necessary. What we start with is making sure that we're understanding all of the goals across the company, what pain points people have, where they want to be in a couple of years, how they're intending to scale and grow the company to make sure that we can meet those needs. Then we tell them what we can do, and then specifically, don't do any of it. What we do is we wait for the business need to build, have them come to us, ask us, and then we step in to provide those solutions. We're running ahead, but we're not doing the build it and they will come. We're making sure that we are prepared for the growth and what we want to do. One of the things to call out is we're a smaller team. We don't have a lot of engineers. We don't have a lot of resources. We do use vendors for a lot of this. We want to make sure and leverage those appropriately as we're growing, as we're planning, and particularly as we're trying to scale what we're doing and accomplish more. Let me talk about a few things that worked really well when we were doing our initial pitch for this technology stack. And as we've been growing, because we're going through and expanding our cluster by about 25% every couple of months as we're continuing to scale that up. The first thing that we do once we've established all of these goals, we know what people are trying to accomplish, we have new things to offer them. The first thing we're typically doing is going in and setting up the options. Whenever we're asking people to provide us resources, we're expensive. We have the coolest toys in the company. We do a lot of things that provide a lot of value. That means that if we want to go off and try something new, if we want to explore a new area, there's a big cost. It might just be opportunity, it might be an outlay of cash, but we're going to be asking for something. Typically when we do that, we're going in and setting up a menu of options being from the, here is the least amount that you can invest and here is what you're going to get from it, to what is the high end? If we had a blank check, what all could we do for you and what option would that look like? Our recommendation is usually somewhere in the middle where we have a sweet spot for what it's going to cost, what we can provide, and the lowest missed opportunities that we can set up. Whenever we're doing these, whenever we're pitching anything, any new technology, any new capability, we're always hyper-focused on the business problems and the things that we can provide and the problems that we can solve. When we're going through and when we started off our first project here, we didn't do a POC saying we're going to test out this platform and figure out what we can do with it. We identified about 8 use cases that were very interesting to the company as a whole. Some of them were the boring technology stuff like how do we scale without breaking the bank. Others are how do we dig into some of this data that was previously inaccessible or way too expensive to get value out of. How do we get something out of it? We went through and rapidly iterate over those. We tend to do that as much as possible, going through and very much focused on the Pareto principle where if we can get 20% of the work done, provide 80% of the value, we'll move on to the next problem. We do that a lot and making sure that we're using the business objectives to tie our technology goals in, making sure first of all those are aligned because it doesn't matter how many cool shiny toys we have, if we're not getting value out of them, people aren't going to be paying any attention to what we do and that cycle stops. And we do like our toys. I'm going to talk about a couple of things that didn't work when we started this. We started off, we had a couple of really cool projects. For example, we're going to mine all of our chat data. We're going to do some sentiment analysis. We're going to get better predictions on our customer behavior and if they churn out or not. No, we didn't. Turns out all of our behavioral data, because no matter what people say, what they do is more important. We already had a large amount of that. A number of the use cases that we were trying out initially didn't particularly work. A lot of them did, and it was enough to move forward, but a lot of the things that we saw when we started out didn't quite pan out the way that we wanted. Out of all the systems we have in production today, none of it was the cool, new, shiny stuff and those interesting challenges that we had initially, but we found new things that we can do as we've moved on. The biggest takeaways that we had trying to pitch this to get the business to invest in it, always focus on the business case, not the technology, not what you can do, and stay away from the hypotheticals, but getting to real value you can provide really quickly. Making sure that you're leveraging your partners, using all of those outside resources and trying to do it yourself. Above all, use and inspect and adapt. Make sure that you're looking at that as you're figuring out what you want to do, what your goals are, and continuing to iterate on those really, really frequently. All right, Don?
All right, now that we've set the stage for what we wanted to do and how we funded it, let's talk about who did the work. We were really excited about this Hadoop opportunity, but we still had a lot of traditional data warehouse work to do. So we couldn't take the entire team and shift them over to start working on this Hadoop project. Instead, we decided to send out a scout. Just send one person to start learning about the Hadoop platform and socialize their learnings with the rest of the team in the least disruptive way possible. This was typically through brown bags and learning days with the rest of the team. And while we did this, we also partnered with our internal operations organization to start acquiring the hardware and preparing the environment to actually deploy Hadoop. While we're doing this, we continued looking for an external partner to come in and really help us get up and running quickly to help work through some of these POCs that David mentioned. And we kept hearing for months about a team within IBM that did exactly what we wanted. However, nobody seemed to know who they were or how to contact them. And this went on for months until one day we're at a conference in Las Vegas, and David literally bumped into the guy who was the head of this team, this mythical team we're looking for. David grabbed a hold of him like he was a leprechaun and made him give us 3 wishes. So IBM came on site for a 12-week engagement. We worked closely with them to build out the POCs so we could answer the question of whether or not Hadoop was the platform we needed to augment our data warehouse. Now, the things that worked for us was bringing in people with experience. It really, time is money, and it really helped to have IBM come in and work with us. By working closely with their consultants on site, working through these real-world POCs, we learned a lot more, and we learned faster too. Much better than, say, going through some labs or Hadoop tutorials online, we learned actually how this was going to work for our business. We also, at this point, added another engineer to the project from our BI team. Now, what didn't work? Hiring we found to be quite difficult. Has anyone else struggled with hiring experienced Hadoop engineers? Really? Yeah. We went through lots of resumes and lots of interviews, and we finally found one contractor who worked with us for about a year and then one FTE. It seemed that there were a lot of people who had read a book or done some online tutorials, but lacked the real-world work experience. If you had real-world work experience, you were already happily employed, it seems, and not looking for work. Another area that was challenging was getting the rest of our BI engineering team up to speed on this new technology. We continued doing these brown bags and learning days for the team, but the feedback we had was it wasn't enough. They felt sort of left out as the 2 engineers were working every day on the platform, but most of the team only got to play with it once a month. So we found that we really needed to rotate the team members more frequently so that everyone got some quality time with a Hadoop platform and help learning the technology stick. Now, just learning the technology, is a challenge too. Fortunately, we had Hive and IBM's Big SQL, which are SQL based, and those are familiar concepts for our team. But there's so many other things you can do on Hadoop. There's other languages. There's Java and Python and Scala and other technologies like Spark and Uzi and you name it, Kafka, it's out there. And we spent a lot of time learning and investigating some of these technologies, and that raised the risk a little bit on what we were doing, and because some of them actually didn't work for what we needed. Now, the key takeaways really for us were to use the experience that you can find. Rotate people in and out of the project as frequently as you can so that everyone gets familiarized with this new technology. Be aware that you're going to take a hit to the velocity of your team overall. And just recognize this is the new technology tax that you have to pay anytime you're adopting a new technology. All right, David's going to take us home with how we approach the initial build-out.
All right. Most of the people here have systems in production, right? How many people have that, between 1 and 5, something around there that are really important mission-critical systems? How many people have more than that? How many people here, when they had the opening in the keynote, asking about for how many companies is this the lifeblood? Are there any people out there who rely on Hadoop exclusively? There are no other systems at play. There's nothing else going on in your enterprise. Now, that's why we didn't raise our hands in the presentation either. It's like we're a little bit above just having a couple of things out there, depending on some of those, but we're not quite at this is everything that we do. Let me talk a little bit about the way that we engage in general. Our team uses agile methodologies, and we're very focused on continuous delivery and doing very small increments. We don't go more than a week without releasing something to production. Some of our systems, when there are these larger data pipelines that we need to do a lot more with, they might go a couple of weeks, sometimes maybe a month or so, but we're always focused on getting value out there and getting it out there fast. We talked a little bit before about using business projects to address platforms and making sure that as we wanted to get more experience with these, as Don said, we have this team, we're excited about it, there are all of these possibilities and things that we can do. How can you align that with the business and deliver value on a very consistent basis to provide new capabilities that you weren't able to do before? We did get into an interesting situation that's a little bit different for us where we had shared ownership across the organization. Basically, with this technology stack, we needed a lot of sysadmins, we needed to touch a lot of different pieces of the organization. That was something that was a little bit different that we hadn't counted on quite as much, just in terms of the impact that it would have. We'd been largely self-sustaining before. The other thing that we make sure and do as an organization is have that frequent communication about what's going on, the new capabilities that we have, all of these options, and we're making sure that we are selling the capabilities that we have to make sure that we can recognize some of the opportunities when they come up. Some of the things that were really helpful for us, while we have some of these major projects that are going on, there are major things that change the way the organization views data, changes our capabilities. One of the big things that we did see was making sure that we had the bandwidth to take on one-off projects. Particularly, we're looking at doing analysis, cracking open data sets that were difficult to deal with, answering questions or solving pain points that weren't really feasible to do before. Part of that being, even though it took some of the focus from our other initiatives, it was able to show some of the value of the platform and make sure that people were willing to continue their investment in it, make sure that they saw the value that we were seeing as solving problems and making progress. One thing to call out when we talk about building incrementally. Right now, the main project that we're working on, we have a data pipeline. We saw Gummy Drop before. That's people going out there that's playing, and we try and make addictive games. These are games people want to play. I'm a little bit surprised that we haven't seen anybody, I think I see 1 or 2 people that are pulling those out and playing those now, which is sort of what we're going for. Not usually during our presentations, but feel free in everybody else's. But we generate a lot of data. We had an ultimate vision about what that looks like. We're going from doing that more batch-oriented analysis to moving it up and getting to real time, being able to respond ever more quickly, getting more and more data flowing through this so we don't have some of those silos. We adjusted to make sure that we could get data from one place to another. You can do federation, so you can ask questions that combine all these different data sources. But getting to the point that we are, and where we want to be in a couple of months, involved doing about 3 generations of this, where each time we solved one part of the problem. We learned a lot, we figured out what we needed for the next time, what was working for us and what wasn't. As we've been going through this process, we've also focused on a gradual transition, where we've been running these various pieces in parallel. One of the things that we found is when we switched over to the new system, no matter all of the things that we thought about, all of the time that we took, we were missing use cases. Things that people wanted to do that they were taking for granted, knowledge gaps, that was something that was a challenge. By focusing on some of the key people, when we took a look at some of these major games, making sure to move people over one at a time, getting some of those learnings, figuring out what we need to do to make it even better and do the next generation, and doing a gradual transition instead of trying to move everybody all at once. We thought it was great, working fine. As soon as you unleash the world on it, you're going to find some things that you didn't see before. A couple of things that were big pain points for us as we went through this. As we rolled out to this new technology stack, our team has been in place and rocking right along for a number of years. One of the things that we saw pretty much immediately was the amount of the cost of ownership was much higher than we were expecting. Instead of being able to have a couple of administrators handle this, answer user requests, find and troubleshoot bugs, we had to stick a number of developers on that to keep everything moving along. The systems, and while some of the technology costs were lower than what we had before, the overall cost of the ownership was something that we underestimated a little bit. Thought it was going to be a little bit higher, but it ended up jumping by a decent amount, partially due to the multi-tenancy that we had on the system, the variety of technologies, and just trying to get a bunch of people onto a new technology stack that they weren't familiar with. One of the other things that we ran into, I talked before about telling people, all right, we have this cool new stuff. Here are the problems that we can solve. Here are all of the things that we can do with it. As it turns out, sometimes people actually listen to that. Being aware, because we had a couple of months ago when some people stepped in and said, oh, by the way, we're planning on using this as part of our new operational system. And we had to go, it's like, whoa, wait a second. You're planning on putting how many millions of users on here? And were you planning on telling us about this at some point? We may have, when communicating, this is out there, people are using it, so we're using this for analytic workloads. There was that immediate rush to adopt it and use it for other use cases that were not really aligned with what we were initially planning. And when we talk about having the multi-tenancy that we have today, sticking another operational workload that has completely different characteristics and SLAs was something that we had to get in front of and change that approach. That approach is standing up another cluster that they can have and go on their merry way with, and then making the two talk. But that was something that we had as a challenge. A couple of key takeaways that we had going through this process is, again, making sure to leverage your vendors, particularly as we're going through, we're having people that are trying to do some interesting things with the system. We ran into a number of different issues. Some of those required going in, standard bug fixes, finding things that didn't work quite as advertised. Figuring out how to get those things resolved was something that we had to work through, and we were able to leverage some external folks in order to make that a little bit smoother and easier. Planning for the total cost of this, for people that are out there, you probably know that when you're looking at an open source stack and solution, it's not free as in beer. Making sure for people that are new to this that you're accounting for how many people it's going to take to set it up, to run it, to support it on an ongoing basis, to look at it from that platform side to make sure that it's adequately supported and you're addressing issues there, is just something to be aware of. Talking about upgrades, we just went through another couple of months ago, a large upgrade to most of the standard Apache products there. Who here has had one of those that went really, really smoothly, that they ran into no issues whatsoever? Anyone? No one? One? All right, then we should talk, because you might be doing something that we're not. Yeah, every time that we've done that, we think, all right, we have, it's like we have automated tests, we have use cases. All right, we're going to simulate some load. Still doesn't quite account for all of the effort that goes into that when we get out into the production environment, and all of a sudden the world is turned loose on this, and then you find all of the things that you didn't quite catch the first time. And the last thing that we found going through this process, as we've gone out and doing, particularly iterating over our systems and our pipelines and putting those out, is just making sure to do that inspect and adapt loop. That if we're going through and not replanning and reevaluating and adjusting on about a 1 or 2 month basis, we're worried that we're going to be going off course. And particularly, we keep seeing so many new use cases, so much value where we didn't anticipate that we were solving a problem and it turned out we are. Making sure that you're looking at that, talking to your customers, and making sure that you understand what value they're getting out of it, so you can adjust and make sure and capture that, particularly if it's low-hanging fruit that you can really provide some value without a whole lot of extra effort. At that point, that's what we had. Well, why did you come here today? What questions do you have for us that we can answer? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, what are the use cases and business cases for this? One of the main things that we wanted to solve, and we had a variety of different targets for this, one of them was being able to have a highly scalable and fairly linearly scalable system that had different characteristics than the technology our main data warehouse was on. We found a couple of things that were major challenges for us on an ongoing basis. The first was that semi-structured or unstructured data, which did not play well with our other technologies. The other part of that was, because we were looking at nonlinear growth, and particularly very spiky growth that was jumping up fairly constantly, we wanted to have a system that we could expand on an ongoing basis a little bit more easily than the forklift operations for an appliance. We're talking about the main things that we're doing in terms of the data. What we're focusing on that's on this platform is user behavior. What we're doing in our other systems where we've done a lot of integration to get a holistic view of the customer. We know what's happening financially, we know when people are going in and doing installs, when they're doing sessions, we know what's happening on our marketing channels. We tie all of that together to get a really good view of the customer. The challenge that we had was, particularly in the free-to-play space, knowing what worked and allowing our game teams to iterate far more quickly. What we wanted to do was to have teams be able, and we work with around 200 or so different development companies across the world, so there's a lot of variation in that data. We wanted people to be able to throw whatever they wanted in there and then get it back out without any engineering resources being required in the meantime. What we also wanted is to make it where we could take that, so that's data that's coming in at scale that we can scale up in order to accommodate, then combine it and blend it with all of the other data sources that we had in order to answer deeper questions that couldn't be answered from any of the sources individually. What kinds of questions? That's really going to depend on the different games that we have. For example, when we're talking about some of our top games that we have out there, we have a social casino that has one very distinctive user group and very different play styles. Then we have casual mid-core such as Dungeon Boss. That's a cartoony RPG strategy game. Then we have games such as Gummy Drop, which is a match 3. One of the challenges is all of those games have very different characteristics and different questions people are asking. Let's take one of those and talk about some of the things we want to know. For instance, if you look at something like Dungeon Boss, how is the economy working? In particular, you have all of these sources and sinks, ways that you can get various types of the currency, ways that they are being spent. What we're trying to figure out is what is working and how to balance that economy to make sure that people are having both a good experience, they can play. You're not doing a pay-to-win game, you're doing a free-to-play, and then allowing people to monetize if they find value in the game and figure out what they want to do. That involves looking at every individual action in order to get a better understanding of how people are using this game, how they're playing it, what parts are engaging and what parts aren't. You're looking at how people are engaging with different parts of the economy, how they're spending their money, and therefore what they're finding interesting or valuable, as well as looking at the various segments to figure out how to optimize for them. There's a very big difference between that top fraction of a percent of people that you have that are extremely highly engaged, that are your major customers, then the next couple of percent, then everyone underneath that. Then it's trying to go through and balance what you're going to do to change the game to make sure that you have plenty of headroom for those top people without damaging the other segments and the other people that are playing your game. All of that requires going through and doing a lot of continuous testing and putting things out there, changing what information you're capturing, and then being able to ask those analytic questions where you're dealing with larger data sets and it's not looking at the last couple of days or a couple of weeks, it's looking at the entire history, figuring out what the seasonality is, looking at all of these different aspects in order to answer questions and do comparisons over time. Yes, sir?
Is your traditional data warehouse shrinking, growing?
Our traditional data warehouse is continuing to grow. So this is growing well on top of that, but that is not going away either. Oh, looks like we are about out of time. Can we do, tell you what. Thank you everyone for attending today. If you want to ask any other questions, please come up and talk to us. Thank you very much.